Imagine waking before sunrise in ancient Rome, not as a senator, not as a merchant, not even as a soldier, but as a man whose entire purpose in life is to walk into places everyone else desperately avoids. The city around you is beginning to stir. Bakers light their ovens, shopkeepers unlock wooden shutters, wealthy citizens prepare for another comfortable day. But your workday begins where theirs ends. Today, just like yesterday and probably tomorrow, you will descend into Rome's foulest corners. You will breathe air so thick with decay that newcomers often vomit before their first hour is complete. And if you are unlucky enough to slip, nobody may even hear your screams. This was not punishment. This was employment. Ancient Rome is often remembered as a magnificent civilization. Marble temples gleamed in the sunlight. Aqueducts carried fresh water across vast distances. Roads connected an empire stretching across continents. Yet beneath this impressive surface lurked a darker reality. A city of more than 1 million people produced mountains of waste every single day. Human waste, animal waste, rotting food, dead vermin, industrial refuse. Everything had to go somewhere. While wealthy Romans admired grand architecture above ground, an invisible workforce struggled beneath their feet, keeping the city from drowning in its own filth. Few citizens ever considered the men responsible for this task. Even fewer wanted to trade places with them. One of the most dreaded jobs belonged to workers assigned to maintain Rome's drainage systems. The most famous sewer, the Cloaca Maxima, was an engineering marvel. Massive stone tunnels carried wastewater away from crowded neighborhoods and public spaces. But unlike modern sewer systems, these passages required constant human maintenance. Workers climbed into dark tunnels carrying simple oil lamps. The light barely penetrated the darkness ahead. The floor beneath them was slippery and uneven. Water mixed with sewage swirled around their ankles. Rats darted through narrow cracks. The smell was impossible to escape. For hours at a time, they removed blockages by hand, knowing that a single mistake could prove fatal. The tunnels themselves posed countless dangers. Heavy rains could transform manageable waterways into deadly torrents within minutes. A worker might enter a sewer under clear skies and find himself trapped when sudden flooding rushed through the underground passages. There were no emergency exits. No protective equipment. No rescue teams waiting nearby. The current could slam a man against stone walls or drag him into complete darkness. Bodies occasionally disappeared without a trace. Families often received no explanation. One day their father left for work. The next day he simply never returned. In a city obsessed with military glory, these deaths passed largely unnoticed. Even surviving the physical dangers did not guarantee safety. Disease haunted sewer workers constantly. Ancient Romans understood very little about bacteria or infection. They could observe sickness but rarely understood its true cause. Cuts and scrapes were unavoidable underground. A small wound on a hand or foot could become infected after exposure to contaminated water. Fever often followed. Then weakness. Then suffering. Many workers developed chronic illnesses that gradually destroyed their health over time. What began as a simple injury could become a death sentence. The city depended on their labor, yet few citizens gave any thought to the price being paid. Above ground, another group faced a different nightmare. These were the collectors responsible for removing waste from public latrines. Roman public toilets could accommodate dozens of people at once. Long stone benches contained rows of openings where citizens sat side by side with little privacy. The facility served thousands every day. Someone had to clean them. Someone had to empty accumulated waste. Someone had to deal with overflowing pits. That someone was usually a poor laborer or enslaved worker. Before sunrise, crews arrived carrying buckets and basic tools. Their work involved direct contact with material everyone else wished to forget existed. And they repeated the process every single day. The odors alone could overwhelm newcomers. Visitors to Rome often described powerful smells drifting through busy districts. Near waste collection sites, the stench became nearly unbearable. Workers spent entire shifts surrounded by fumes rising from decomposing organic matter. Imagine standing beside an overflowing garbage heap during the hottest day of summer. Now imagine never leaving. Hours became days. Days became years. The smell embedded itself into clothing, skin, and hair. Many laborers carried the odor home with them. Neighbors recognized their profession instantly. Social status in Rome mattered enormously, and occupations associated with filth often condemned workers to lives of humiliation alongside physical hardship. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect was society's attitude toward these jobs. Romans respected soldiers. They admired successful merchants. They celebrated politicians and wealthy landowners. But workers who handled waste occupied the lowest rungs of society. Many citizens treated them as if they were invisible. Others viewed them with open disgust. Yet the irony was impossible to ignore. Without these laborers, Rome's streets would have become unlivable. Disease would have spread more rapidly. Public spaces would have deteriorated. The city's celebrated grandeur depended upon people performing tasks nobody wanted to acknowledge. Their importance was enormous. Their recognition was almost non-existent. For enslaved workers, conditions could be even worse. An enslaved laborer had little ability to refuse dangerous assignments. Owners demanded results regardless of risk. If a sewer collapsed, someone entered. If a blockage formed, someone cleared it. If toxic conditions developed, someone remained until the task was finished. Failure could bring punishment. Success often brought nothing. Historical records suggest many enslaved workers endured exhausting schedules with minimal concern for their well-being. To Rome's elite, laborers were frequently viewed as tools rather than individuals. A broken tool could be replaced. A dead worker could be replaced as well. Such realities reveal a darker side of Roman society rarely highlighted in stories of imperial greatness. As night falls over the city, most Romans retreat indoors. Taverns fill with conversation. Families gather around meals. The wealthy enjoy comforts made possible by the empire's immense resources. Yet somewhere beneath the streets, a small lamp flickers in the darkness. A worker continues his shift inside a damp tunnel. Water drips from ancient stone. Rats scurry through shadows. The air hangs heavy with decay. Tomorrow another crew will clean the latrines. Another laborer will haul waste through crowded streets. Another worker will descend beneath Rome. And this was only the beginning. Because among all the horrific occupations in ancient Rome, some jobs were even worse than cleaning the city's filth. If cleaning Rome's filth sounds horrifying, consider a job where the people you handle are no longer alive. Ancient Rome was a city filled with danger. Disease swept through crowded neighborhoods, construction accidents claimed lives, violence erupted in taverns and alleyways, public executions attracted large crowds. Death was everywhere. Yet dead bodies did not simply disappear. Someone had to remove them. Someone had to carry them through narrow streets. Someone had to deal with bloated corpses abandoned in the summer heat. For a small group of laborers, death was not an occasional sight. It was their daily workplace. Every sunrise brought another collection. Every sunset left another memory few people would want to carry. Imagine walking through Rome before dawn. The streets are quiet except for distant footsteps and barking dogs. You carry a rough wooden cart. Its wheels creak over uneven stones. Your assignment is simple. Find the dead. Perhaps an elderly beggar died beside a wall during the night. Perhaps a laborer collapsed from exhaustion. Perhaps a victim of robbery lies forgotten in a dark alley. The city wants these bodies removed before crowds appear. The work must be completed quickly. Most citizens prefer not to think about where the dead go. That responsibility belongs to you. And before the day is over, the cart will likely be full. Summer made the job far worse. Rome's climate could become brutally hot. Without refrigeration or modern preservation methods, bodies began decomposing rapidly. The process was impossible to ignore. Skin changed color. Fluids leaked onto stone streets. Insects gathered in enormous numbers. The smell could spread across entire neighborhoods. Workers collecting bodies often arrived after decomposition had already begun. They lifted corpses by hand. They wrapped them in cloth when possible. Sometimes they transported several bodies at once. The journey through crowded districts became a moving reminder of mortality. For these workers, the sight and smell of death became ordinary. Yet ordinary did not mean easy. Not every body was found intact. Some deaths involved horrific injuries. Construction workers occasionally fell from scaffolding. Criminals faced brutal punishments. Street violence could leave victims severely disfigured. Then there were the animals. Stray dogs and scavenging creatures sometimes reached bodies before collectors arrived. The result could be deeply disturbing. Workers often encountered scenes capable of haunting even experienced laborers. Unlike modern emergency responders, they received little training and almost no support. They were simply expected to continue, to keep moving, to load the cart, to prepare for the next call. Because Rome never stopped producing the dead, one of the most feared assignments involved epidemic outbreaks. Disease spread easily through crowded Roman neighborhoods. When illness struck, death could arrive in waves. A collector who normally handled a few bodies might suddenly face dozens. Entire households could perish within days. The streets became quieter. Businesses closed. Fear spread faster than reliable information. Many citizens avoided infected districts entirely. Body collectors had no such option. Their duties required them to enter the most dangerous areas of the city. Every door they approached carried uncertainty. Every corpse represented a possible threat. And yet the work continued because someone had to do it. Few places in Rome produced more death than the gladiatorial arena. To spectators, the games were thrilling entertainment. Crowds cheered. Trumpets sounded. Victorious fighters basked in admiration. But once the audience departed, another workforce entered the arena. Their task was far less glamorous. The sand was stained with blood. Broken weapons littered the ground. Bodies waited to be removed. Some gladiators died instantly. Others lingered after devastating wounds. Collectors dragged corpses away while preparing the arena for future events. The crowd remembered the heroes. Almost nobody remembered the men who cleaned up afterward. Historical accounts describe specialized attendants working inside arenas after deadly contests. These workers performed duties many Romans considered deeply unpleasant. They checked bodies, removed equipment, transported the dead. Sometimes they worked while spectators still occupied portions of the venue. Blood soaked into clothing. The smell of iron filled the air. Heavy armor increased the difficulty of moving fallen fighters. A gladiator might weigh far more than an ordinary laborer. Lifting and carrying such bodies required strength and endurance. At the end of the day, workers left the arena exhausted, stained by evidence of Rome's favorite entertainment. Execution grounds created another grim workplace. Public punishments were designed to send a message. Large crowds gathered to witness justice as defined by Roman authorities. But eventually the spectators returned home. The condemned remained. Someone had to clear the site. Someone had to remove the bodies. Someone had to transport the remains beyond the city. Workers assigned to these duties saw the aftermath of crucifixions, beatings, and other brutal punishments. The emotional toll must have been enormous. Yet society expected them to carry on as if the work were routine. Perhaps that expectation was one of the cruelest parts. The danger was not only psychological. Handling bodies exposed workers to disease, parasites, and contamination. Protective gloves did not exist. Masks did not exist. Sanitizing chemicals did not exist. Workers relied largely on experience and luck. A small cut on the hand could become infected. A contaminated wound might develop into something far more serious. Many laborers probably accepted sickness as an unavoidable consequence of their profession. Every task carried risk. Every body represented uncertainty. Yet poverty often left little choice. Refusing dangerous work could mean hunger. Accepting it could mean illness. Neither option offered much comfort. As darkness settles over Rome, a cart rattles through nearly empty streets. Inside lie the remains of people whose stories have ended. The driver keeps moving. Tomorrow there will be more. Another victim of disease. Another casualty of violence. Another gladiator who entered the arena expecting victory and found death instead. The city sleeps while its collectors continue their grim duties. Most Romans never thanked them. Many barely noticed them. Yet without these workers, Rome would quickly become overwhelmed by the consequences of mortality. And still, astonishingly, even these men did not hold the most terrifying jobs in the empire. Far from the city streets, thousands of workers faced conditions so brutal that many never lived long enough to grow old. For many Romans, being assigned to a mine was worse than receiving a prison sentence. At least prisoners could sometimes see the sky. At least they could occasionally walk through open air. Mine workers often lost both privileges. Deep beneath rocky hills and mountains, thousands of laborers spent their lives extracting the resources that fueled Rome's vast empire. Gold, silver, copper, lead. The treasures of Rome came at a terrible human cost. While emperors celebrated wealth and military victories, countless workers disappeared underground each day. Many would never emerge healthy again. Some would never emerge at all. For them, every descent into the darkness felt like entering a world built for suffering. Before sunrise, groups of workers gathered at mine entrances. The opening often resembled the mouth of a giant beast. Cold air drifted from the darkness below. Guards shouted orders. Tools were distributed. Chains rattled. Many laborers were enslaved people, criminals, prisoners of war, or individuals condemned to hard labor. They knew what awaited them. Long hours, dangerous conditions, constant exhaustion. Yet refusal was impossible. One by one, they disappeared into narrow tunnels illuminated only by weak oil lamps. The daylight behind them gradually faded. Ahead stretched endless darkness. For some workers, that darkness would become the last thing they ever saw. The tunnels themselves were terrifying. Many passages were barely large enough for a person to crawl through. Workers squeezed between rough stone walls while carrying tools and baskets. The air often felt hot, stale, and difficult to breathe. Dust coated every surface. Every strike of a pickaxe released more particles into the atmosphere. Hour after hour, workers inhaled the debris. Ancient Romans did not understand the long-term effects of such exposure. But miners certainly felt the consequences. Persistent coughing became common. Breathing grew difficult. Strength gradually faded. A young laborer could begin the job healthy and powerful, only to become weak and sick within a few years. Collapse was a constant threat. Roman mining technology was impressive for its time, but tunnels remained fragile. A single crack could signal disaster. Workers listened carefully to the sounds around them. The groan of shifting rock. The fall of loose stones. The sudden vibration of unstable walls. Sometimes there was enough warning to escape. Often there was not. When a tunnel collapsed, tons of rock could bury workers instantly. Rescue attempts were difficult and dangerous. Many trapped laborers suffocated before help arrived. Others were simply abandoned because reaching them was considered impossible. The mine moved on. The dead remained where they fell. Water created another nightmare. Underground flooding could transform a routine workday into a catastrophe. A hidden pocket of water might suddenly burst into a tunnel. Heavy rain above ground could seep into excavation areas. Workers carrying heavy tools had little chance of outrunning rapidly rising water. Darkness made escape even harder. Panic spread quickly. Men stumbled through unfamiliar passages searching for exits. Some reached safety. Others vanished into flooded chambers. For families waiting outside, there was rarely any detailed explanation. A husband or son entered the mine that morning. By evening he was gone. The mountain had claimed another victim. The search for precious metals often demanded extreme measures. Gold mining in particular required enormous effort. Workers spent countless hours breaking rock apart with hand tools. Their muscles ached constantly. Hands blistered and bled. The work was repetitive, exhausting, and relentless. Even after gathering ore, the process was far from complete. Heavy loads had to be transported through narrow passages. Baskets filled with stone weighed heavily on shoulders already weakened by fatigue. Each trip drained more energy. Each day felt almost identical. The labor never seemed to end. For many miners, survival itself became the only goal. Conditions were especially brutal for enslaved workers. Many mine owners viewed laborers as expendable resources. If a worker became injured or too weak to continue, replacement was often easier than treatment. Productivity mattered more than human life. Historical records describe mining operations with shockingly high mortality rates. Some laborers lasted only a few years. Others survived longer but carried permanent injuries. Broken bones healed poorly. Chronic illnesses worsened. Vision problems developed from years spent in dim conditions. By the time some workers left the mines, they looked decades older than their actual age. The mines consumed people as efficiently as they produced metal. Lead mining may have been among the most dangerous occupations of all. The Romans relied heavily on lead for pipes, construction, and numerous industrial applications. Extracting it exposed workers to toxic substances they did not fully understand. Miners experienced weakness, confusion, persistent sickness. Many likely suffered from long-term poisoning. Yet the connection between the metal and their deteriorating health remained largely unknown. The symptoms appeared gradually, making the danger difficult to identify. Workers simply became ill. Some recovered. Many did not. The mine continued operating regardless. Demand for resources remained high, and Rome's appetite for wealth showed no signs of slowing. Imagine the psychological burden of living this life. Every day begins underground. Every day ends underground. You breathe dust. You hear the endless striking of tools against stone. You watch fellow workers disappear through accidents, disease, or exhaustion. The outside world becomes distant. Sunlight feels unfamiliar. Freedom feels impossible. Many laborers likely understood that they would die in the mines long before reaching old age. Hope gradually fades under such conditions. The future shrinks to a single objective: survive today, then survive tomorrow. And after enough years pass, even that goal can begin to feel uncertain. As evening arrives, a small group of miners finally emerges from the darkness. Their faces are covered with dust. Their clothing hangs heavily from exhausted bodies. Behind them, countless tunnels stretch deep into the earth. Some workers are missing. Perhaps they were injured. Perhaps trapped. Perhaps dead. Tomorrow the survivors will return underground and continue extracting the wealth that powers Rome's empire. Senators will debate policies. Merchants will count profits. Emperors will celebrate prosperity. Few will think about the people who paid for that prosperity with their health and their lives. Yet even among Rome's most brutal occupations, one final profession remained especially feared. Because unlike miners, these workers faced death not from accidents or exhaustion, but from direct contact with the empire's most savage form of entertainment. By the time the crowds entered the arena, everything looked magnificent. The sand appeared clean. The seating areas buzzed with excitement. Merchants sold food and drinks. Spectators searched for the best view. To them, the amphitheater was a place of entertainment, a place of spectacle, a place where heroes could be made. But hidden behind the scenes was a workforce that saw a very different version of the games. They witnessed what happened after the cheering stopped, after the trumpets faded, after the crowds went home. Because someone had to remain behind and deal with the consequences of Rome's bloodiest pastime. And that responsibility belonged to some of the most unfortunate workers in the empire. The day often began long before the first fight. Arena workers prepared the grounds for thousands of spectators. Heavy gates had to be checked. Animal cages required inspection. Weapons and equipment needed transport. The amphitheater functioned like a giant machine, and every machine depended on labor. Most spectators never considered the people working beneath the arena floor. Yet hidden passageways stretched through the structure like a maze. Workers hurried through narrow corridors carrying supplies. Above them, crowds anticipated excitement. Below them, laborers prepared for chaos. They understood that before sunset, many living creatures would not leave the arena alive. One of the most dangerous responsibilities involved caring for the animals. Rome imported exotic beasts from across its vast territories. Lions from Africa, leopards, bears, wolves, wild boars, sometimes even elephants. These creatures were not performers. They were wild animals trapped in unfamiliar environments. Feeding them was dangerous. Transporting them was dangerous. Cleaning their enclosures was dangerous. A single mistake could prove fatal. A broken latch, a distracted worker, a frightened animal. Any of these could transform an ordinary task into a deadly encounter within seconds. Imagine entering a holding area beneath the arena. The air smells of straw, sweat, and animal waste. Somewhere nearby, a lion growls. Metal bars separate you from a predator capable of killing with one strike. Yet your job requires approaching the cage. You carry food. You inspect locks. You clean the surrounding area. Every movement demands caution. Even experienced handlers could not afford complacency. Animals behaved unpredictably. Fear and aggression often intensified in captivity. Workers learned to respect that reality. Many likely carried scars from close encounters. Others never had the opportunity to learn from their mistakes. Then came the games themselves. Thousands of spectators filled the seats. The atmosphere became electric. Cheers echoed through the massive structure. Combatants entered the arena. Animals emerged from hidden gates. Violence followed. Some contests ended quickly. Others lasted much longer. But regardless of the outcome, workers knew what awaited them afterward. Blood. Injuries. Corpses. The audience focused on the drama. Arena staff focused on the cleanup. Their work began where the entertainment ended. And some days produced scenes almost impossible to forget. When a gladiator fell, attendants often entered the arena. Their duties varied, but one responsibility remained constant. The dead had to be removed. Armor made bodies heavy. Weapons cluttered the sand. The process required speed and efficiency. Spectators expected the next event to begin without delay. Workers dragged corpses away while thousands watched. The crowd's attention quickly shifted toward upcoming entertainment. For arena laborers, however, the previous battle remained very real. They handled its physical aftermath directly. Every wound, every pool of blood, every reminder that a human life had just ended before an applauding audience. The animals created additional challenges. Not every beast died immediately after a hunt or spectacle. Some remained wounded and dangerous. An injured predator could be even more unpredictable than a healthy one. Workers sometimes entered areas where frightened animals struggled violently. The risk was enormous. A wounded bear might lash out unexpectedly. A trapped leopard might attack anyone nearby. These situations required courage few spectators ever appreciated. Success often went unnoticed. Failure could become fatal. And because records typically celebrated emperors and gladiators, the stories of these workers were rarely preserved. Once the events concluded, another grim task began. The arena floor had to be cleaned. Blood soaked into the sand. Animal remains sometimes littered portions of the grounds. Broken equipment lay scattered across the fighting area. Workers carried shovels, buckets, and tools. They removed debris, replaced damaged sections, prepared the venue for future events. Imagine performing this work after witnessing hours of violence. Imagine knowing that tomorrow's cleanup might look exactly the same. For many laborers, death was not an unusual occurrence. It was simply part of the work schedule. A horrifying routine repeated again and again. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect was how ordinary it all became. Humans possess an incredible ability to adapt. Even terrible environments can begin to feel normal over time. Arena workers likely developed routines. They learned where blood accumulated. They learned how to move bodies efficiently. They learned how to avoid dangerous animals. What would horrify an outsider became another day's labor. Yet that adaptation carried a cost. Constant exposure to violence changes people. The psychological burden must have been immense. Rome celebrated the spectacle. Workers carried the memories. Long after the crowd forgot a particular event, those memories probably remain. As darkness settles over the amphitheater, silence finally returns. The spectators have gone home. The merchants have packed their goods. The arena stands empty beneath the night sky. Yet traces of the day's events linger. A stain in the sand. A damaged shield. A distant animal cry from beneath the structure. Workers finish their final tasks before leaving. Tomorrow another crowd will arrive. Another spectacle will begin. Another group of laborers will stand behind the scenes, performing jobs few people would willingly accept. When we think about ancient Rome, we often picture emperors, generals, and magnificent architecture. But Rome's greatness was supported by countless ordinary people whose lives were filled with danger, suffering, and sacrifice. The men who cleaned sewers, the collectors of the dead, the miners buried beneath mountains, the workers who faced blood and beasts inside the arena. They rarely appeared in monuments. Their names were rarely recorded. Yet without them, the empire could not have functioned. And perhaps the most horrifying truth of all is that while history remembers Rome's glory, millions of workers experienced a very different empire, one built not on marble and triumph, but on exhausting labor carried out in the shadows.